role tungsten is playing in AI and more. Welcome back to Techstination. I'm Fred Fishkin. Joining us from Almonty Industries, ALMONTY, is CEO Lewis Black. Hi, Lewis.
Hi, Fred. Good morning.
Good morning. And for the audience who might have seen the name Lewis Black, it's this Lewis Black, not that other Lewis Black.
Well,
Great to have you
I hope to be as entertaining as my name bearer. I'm not sure who went first, him or I.
Well, tungsten has an interesting history. Most of us know it as the material that was used in filament light bulbs. And now there are new markets, one of which is AI for tungsten. Give us a little background, first off, about your company.
Well, we're the largest producers of tungsten outside of China. China obviously dominates this space. We've been around in our current form for around 20 years. But one of our mines in Portugal is the longest running mine in history. It's going now for 136 years and still going strong. And of course, tungsten is extensively used in pretty much every industrial and technology sector, including defense. And so this mine has seen the world through various lenses of different world wars. And so there's an awful lot of history around tungsten. Tungsten tends to be part of a lot of history-making moments, given its applications.
Well, tell us a little bit more. I mean, on your website, you have some interesting, I guess, factoids about tungsten that many of us would find surprising.
Well, I think in relation to new technologies, it's quite unique. It's used across all new technologies now consume tungsten, whether it be batteries, whether it be solar panels, whether it be your screens on your phones, satellites, and of course, as you mentioned, AI. So AI requires the cutting edge of semiconductors because ultimately the semiconductors now have been miniaturized. They work at a much faster pace, and you pump not only a tungsten gas into each semiconductor so you can dissipate the heat, but the new generation of wiring that's being used, and China is really leading the way on this, is a tungsten copper wire, which can be, in fact, created to be almost a nano size fraction, which of course is bordering on essentially, you need a microscope to almost see it. And when you can operate wiring at that sort of level, it gives you an awful lot of new ability to continue miniaturization as well as increase the speed that your semiconductors can operate at. So no tungsten, no AI. And remember, AI is not new. We've had it for many years. I mean, your windscreen wipers that sense rain is a form of AI. What has changed is the speed in which AI can be deployed. And that's why now we're seeing it much more prevalent in our lives.
And what are the properties of tungsten that make it so useful here?
Well, tungsten is, I mean, its chemical symbols, obviously W for wolfram, which means dark wolf. This is what it was called. We call it black gold because it glistens when you find it in an ore form. It's really a sort of alien metal. And I say this without trying to be too dramatic, but you can't smelt it because its melting temperature is slightly less than the temperature of the sun, hence why it's used now in all the fusion reactors that are being developed. You need huge amounts of tungsten. It's also very durable, so it can take enormous amounts of heat and enormous amount of wear, but if you drop it in its form, it shatters. It's very brittle. So it shares the same density as gold, but it's an extraordinary metal, and you need very little of it in its applications. That's really, I think, worth remembering. It's a very scarce metal, very difficult to find, but it's used in just about every part of your life. You just don't really realize it.
Well, tell us about that and the growth in demand that we've been seeing.
Well, I mean, tungsten's always grown 3 to 5% a year. There's always current applications, automotive, aerospace, defense, has always been drivers. But what we've seen in the last decade as technology has really started to accelerate, the hardware of technologies begin to accelerate, we've seen all kinds of new developments that tungsten is consumed. Remember, tungsten is very dense, so you can't use much of it because you don't want weight. Anything that you build, weight is bad. But you need very little of it. And that made it a very good metal to use in, for instance, anodes and cathodes on batteries for EVs, meaning you can charge much quicker. You pretty much eliminate cobalt, therefore they don't combust, so you don't have that problem of them burning for 48 hours. And I think, scientifically, tungsten has always been a go-to metal for many researchers. because of its properties. It's very conductive, it dissipates heat, it's extremely durable. So all these factors matter when you're looking at new applications.
And so we're seeing this increasing demand. Tell us about the role that you are playing and hope to be playing in increasing production. You're working, for instance, in South Korea on a mine that has existed for many years.
Well, we're reopening the South Korean mine that we acquired back in 2015, I believe, or 2016. It was formerly the world's largest tungsten mine. Building mines in democracies is not for the faint-hearted. It is something which requires patience and diligence and caution. It is possible, but many people like the easy route of jurisdictions with less rules and regulations. I like to sleep at night. I like to know that the president's son isn't going to wake up one morning and decide he wants to be in the tungsten business, and therefore the mine's gone. I want to be in a rule of law, and my customers do. Remember, we supply companies that are vertical that then end up supplying the Apples, the IBMs, the Boeings, the Airbuses. That transparency is extremely important to the end users. So, Korea is being developed or being redesigned to reopen as one of the world's most advanced mines. It's almost fully automated. It is carbon neutral because all our power comes from nuclear power, from a nuclear power station in Korea. It's the approach to ESG has been done to Equator Principles, which is the highest level of international standard of ESG, and it's still commercially viable. And we've been able to compete against China. China and Russia dominate tungsten. They're 90% of the world's supply. But we have survived as the sort of lone holdout, as the independent, because we've always developed technologies to allow us to compete against governments, against China's government, against the Russian government. And that has always made us quite unique. We've invested heavily in education. We work closely with, say, SNU, Seoul National University in Korea, with Porto University in Portugal. We've always felt that the development of technology to keep yourself competitive when you're up against a battle of, say, the Chinese government has been absolutely key to our survival.
And as you were saying, doing this in a democracy such as South Korea and other countries in the world is not for the faint of heart. What are the biggest challenges that you faced?
Time. Time is the biggest challenge. It's a lengthy process. I would say
environmental regulations, that kind of
regulations for everything, and things you don't even imagine that there could be regulations. There are regulations. I think what we've seen with a mine in the West is that from start to finish, you're looking at a decade to open. So 10 years. Whereas if I look at a comparable mine in, say, China or in, I don't know, Rwanda or, other countries with less regulations, you're looking through. So you can see competitively, if you're in search of products, it's a wait in a democracy. And I think, yes, there are regulations. And I think mining has become less relevant in democracy. So a lot of the regulations that apply to you have applied to industry, generally. So before there'd be specific mining regulations, now those regulations have been absorbed into industrial regulations. So you're having to essentially perform at levels that perhaps a factory is being asked to. So it's a very different animal now than it was 20 years ago. That's for sure. And so this desire of the West to diversify is a double-edged sword, because it's going to take a long time, doesn't win you any votes, and ultimately you can't cut corners. So you're pushing a policy that is going to fall outside of the election cycle. So there's a good chance the next person's going to take the credit for the success. So you can see that it's not really something that is really, they always say we've got to diversify, but it's really left to companies like ourselves to actually do it, rather than look to government for enormous amounts of assistance. As well, you have to remember, could be very careful here. Elements that, products that are dominated by one or two jurisdictions that perhaps may or may not share your values. If you're a government looking to diversify, you don't want to run the risk that you bite the hand that feeds you. So there's only so much noise that you're willing to make, because you don't really know what's going to happen if you make too much noise. You know, I mean, we've all seen Seinfeld. We all remember the soup Nazi. We could perfectly happen, you know, that they say, oh, if you're not happy using our material, go somewhere else. But there is nowhere else to go. So it's a very fine line we have to tread.
Interesting. Do we know what do geologists or scientists say about the potential for finding more tungsten in other places?
Pretty much. I mean, in the 50s and 60s, tungsten was more valuable than gold, fueled, unfortunately, by all the conflicts that existed in the world, including the Cold War. And so everyone and his dog was out there looking for tungsten. I mean, everywhere. So we have a really good, you know, the USGS, there's a very good understanding of deposits. If you look in the former Soviet Union, tungsten was the backbone of their military and was therefore a state secret. The same in China is considered extremely important. Strategically, it's in the top 3 of metals of most jurisdictions on the planet, tungsten. So we know where the deposits are. The downside is they're traditionally low grade, inaccessible, in areas that you could never build, some of them, and there are no new deposits being found. So we are operating on a finite resource.
Very interesting. So the uses continue to multiply. The supplies aren't that easy to find.
Essentially, I mean, supply, as I said, is dominated by China and Russia. And they came into the market in the 80s with a very low price, you know, to buy market share. In the 70s, there was nearly 100 tungsten mines around the world outside of China and Russia. And by the mid 90s, there were 2 left. So there was a very effective strategy to decimate and to acquire that market share. And they've never given up that market share since. So they executed their plan extremely efficiently. And so this you have to tip the hat to. I think they came at the right moment in terms of raw materials. Mines, you know, once the Cold War had ended, the political will for resource independence diminished, because a mine is a mine, even though mines now are very different from what they were 30 years ago. I mean, our impact, our environmental impact, our social impact, you're much less obvious that you exist than you were 30 years ago, but politically it was not something that was going to win you an election.
And now there's somewhat of a new urgency, I suppose, given the
Well, yes and no. I think the view is China is still supplying, and there are plenty of other things to be getting upset about than worrying whether they're going to continue to supply you. I think that's the view politically that's occurred. I think the EV was a great example. And AI is semiconductors is now the next thing. They were worried about how you can actually build enough EVs because you don't have any diversity of raw materials. Now EVs is sort of slowing up in terms of their being embraced. Now you've got issues with AI. AI is going to be a backbone of the future. There's no doubt about it. You will go into a hospital for minor surgery and you will meet a guy with a robotic arm. You know, that's just the future. But in order to do that, you need these semiconductors. They're produced predominantly in Taiwan and Korea. They make the semiconductors. But in turn, the raw materials for those semiconductors predominantly come from China. So you are still faced with exactly the same problem than you have with EVs. And the next moment that you look at, you're going to have the same problem. Diversification has not occurred in the 10 years that we've been talking about it. That's the reality.
Fascinating stuff. Where's the best place for people to go for more info?
Well, you know, we're a bit of a stickler for data. So, you know, we're fairly kind of academically minded. We have academic minds in the company. We like what we do with tungsten. We don't know anything about anything else, but tungsten we know a great deal about. So our website is a good pool of information, and there's always good reference points there to do further research.
And the website is almonty.com, ALMONTY.com.
The combination of my business partner and my father's names. He was called Alphonse. My dad was called Monty.
Terrific. All in the family. Lewis Black, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thanks, Fred. Thank you very much.